The snow fell silently around Sacred Heart Hospital's outdoor Christmas display, where a towering wooden cross stood illuminated against the December darkness. Sarah Martinez pulled her coat tighter over her growing belly, heading home after another exhausting shift in the pediatric ward. That's when she saw him, a boy no older than 10, kneeling in the snow before the cross, his thin shoulders shaking with each whispered prayer. She'd seen enough heartbreak in her 8 years as a nurse to recognize desperate hope when she saw it. But as Sarah approached the child, planning to offer him shelter from the cold, his words stopped her dead in her tracks. He wasn't praying for toys or games. He was begging God to save his mother. The same mother Sarah had been treating in the cancer ward upstairs. The same mother who'd been asking about the son she'd given up for adoption 10 years ago. The boy looked up at Sarah with eyes that mirrored her own, and she realized this wasn't just any homeless child. What Sarah didn't know was that this moment would force her to confront the most painful secret of her past, and the choice that would determine 3 futures hanging in the balance. But how could she tell him the truth when she'd spent a decade trying to forget it herself? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah's hand instinctively moved to her belly, where her unborn daughter kicked softly beneath her ribs. The irony wasn't lost on her. Here she stood, 6 months pregnant and preparing for motherhood, face to face with the child she'd given away when she was barely 18 herself. "Please, mister," the boy whispered, mistaking her for a man in the dim light. His voice cracked with cold and desperation. "Please make my mama better. The doctors say she might not have much time left." Sarah's throat constricted. Elena Vasquez had been in the oncology unit for 3 weeks now, her cervical cancer having spread aggressively. Sarah had been assigned to coordinate her care with the pediatric team because of Elena's repeated requests about her missing son. The woman spoke of him constantly, how she'd named him Gabriel, how she'd been forced to give him up when addiction consumed her life, how she'd gotten clean too late to find him again. "Sweetheart," Sarah managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "What's your name?" The boy wiped his nose with the back of his sleeve, his clothes clearly too thin for the December weather. Gabriel Vasquez. I've been trying to find my mama for 2 years, ever since my foster family said I was too much trouble. 2 years. Sarah's heart shattered as she processed this. Gabriel had been living on the streets for 2 years while his mother lay dying 1 floor above them, searching for him with the same desperate longing that now radiated from his small frame. "How did you know she was here?" Sarah asked gently, crouching down despite her pregnancy. Snow soaked through her scrubs, but she didn't care. "I heard some people talking at the shelter. They said Elena Vasquez was real sick at Sacred Heart, asking about her boy, Gabriel. That's gotta be me, right? Elena's my mama's name." His eyes held a mixture of hope and terror, but the security guard wouldn't let me up to see her, said I needed family permission. Sarah's medical badge caught the light from the Christmas display, and Gabriel's eyes widened with recognition. "You work here. Please, lady, please help me see her. I promise I won't cause trouble. I just want to tell her I'm okay, that I found her." The weight of the moment pressed down on Sarah like a physical force. She could walk away, finish her shift, go home to her husband Marcus, and pretend this encounter never happened. That would be the safe choice, the one that wouldn't complicate the carefully constructed life she'd built since giving Gabriel away. Or she could do what every fiber of her being screamed was right. Reunite a dying mother with the son she'd never stopped loving, even if it meant revealing the truth about her own identity. "Gabriel," she said softly, standing up slowly, "what if I told you that your mama has been looking for you every single day since she got here, that she talks about you constantly, wondering if you're safe, if you're warm, if you know how much she loves you?" His thin face lit up with an expression of pure joy that nearly brought Sarah to her knees. "Really? She really wants to see me?" Sarah nodded, unable to speak past the emotion clogging her throat. She thought about the baby growing inside her, about the family she and Marcus were building together. She thought about Elena upstairs, asking every nurse if they'd seen a boy with dark hair and green eyes. She thought about the 18-year-old girl she'd been, scared and alone, making an impossible choice. "Come with me," Sarah said finally, extending her hand. "Let's get you inside before you freeze." The fluorescent lights of Mercy General's emergency department cast everything in harsh, unforgiving white as Sarah Chen hurried through the double doors. Her wet scrubs clung uncomfortably to her skin, and her mind remained fixed on the image of the boy kneeling in the snow. Even now, 20 minutes later, she could still see his small hands pressed together in desperate prayer. "You're soaked," commented Dr. Martinez as she passed the nurse's station. "Rough night?" Sarah managed a distracted smile. "Just got caught in the snow." She didn't mention the detour that had made her late, or the way her heart had nearly broken watching that child's silent vigil. The emergency department buzzed with its usual controlled chaos. A construction worker waited with a bandaged hand. An elderly woman clutched her chest while family members hovered nearby. And somewhere beyond the curtained partitions, she could hear the steady beep of monitors, tracking fragile lives. "Sarah, thank God you're here," called Janet Morrison, the charge nurse, her grey hair escaping from beneath a Santa hat that had seen better days. "We've got a full house tonight. Room 7 needs vitals and we have an incoming ambulance. Homeless woman found collapsed near downtown." The words hit Sarah like ice water. Homeless woman? Yeah, poor thing. Hypothermia? Possible pneumonia? ETA 5 minutes. Janet's voice carried the weary compassion of someone who'd seen too many such cases during the holiday season. Sarah's hands trembled as she reached for her stethoscope. The coincidence felt impossible, yet something deep in her chest told her it wasn't coincidence at all. Do we know anything else about her? Not much. Mid-30s, found behind the old Riverside Church. Looks like she'd been there for hours. The Riverside Church. Sarah's breath caught. That was less than 3 blocks from where she'd found the boy. Her baby shifted restlessly in her womb, as if sensing her sudden anxiety. The ambulance sirens grew louder, and Sarah found herself moving toward the emergency bay doors before she'd consciously decided to go there. Through the glass, she watched the red and white lights paint the falling snow in alternating shades of warning and surrender. The woman lying beneath the thermal blankets was younger than Sarah had expected, with dark hair matted against pale skin. But it wasn't her appearance that made Sarah's knees nearly buckle. It was the small, faded photograph clutched in the woman's frozen fingers. Even from several feet away, Sarah could make out the image of a young boy with serious dark eyes. Patient is Maria Santos, approximately 34 years old. The paramedic rattled off vitals as they rushed toward Trauma Bay 3. Core temperature 89 degrees, blood pressure dropping, possible respiratory infection. Sarah followed the stretcher in a daze, her training taking over even as her mind reeled. Maria Santos. The name meant nothing to her, yet everything about this moment felt predestined, as if invisible threads had been weaving this encounter long before tonight. As they transferred Maria to the hospital bed, Sarah caught a clearer glimpse of the photograph. The boy in the picture was definitely the same child she'd seen at the cross. Same thin face, same enormous eyes that seemed to hold too much sadness for someone so young. "Sarah, I need you to get a chest X-ray ordered and start her on warm saline," Dr. Martinez instructed as he began his examination. "This doesn't look good." Sarah nodded, forcing herself to focus on the medical protocols even as questions flooded her mind. Where was the boy now? Did he know his mother was here? How long had they been living on the streets? As she worked, adjusting 4 lines and monitoring vitals, Sarah found herself studying Maria's face. There was something familiar about her features, something that nagged at the edges of Sarah's memory like a half-remembered dream. The high cheekbones, the shape of her eyes. "Dr. Martinez," she said quietly, "has she regained consciousness at all?" "Briefly in the ambulance, but she was delirious. Kept asking for someone named Tommy." He frowned at the monitors. "We need to get her temperature up slowly. This level of hypothermia. She's lucky to be alive." "Tommy," The boy's name was Tommy. Sarah filed the information away as she continued her work, but her thoughts kept drifting to the child she'd left, kneeling in the snow. Was he still there? Was he somewhere warm and safe, or was he wandering the streets looking for his mother? The photograph had slipped from Maria's fingers during the transfer, and now it lay on the bedside table like a small beacon. Sarah glanced at it again, and this time something clicked into place. Not a complete picture, but a fragment of recognition that made her pulse quicken. She'd seen this woman before. Not recently, and not in circumstances she could immediately place, but somewhere in her past their paths had crossed. As Maria's monitors steadied and her breathing grew less labored, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She was going to find Tommy. The boy's name was Marcus, and he was 8 years old. Sarah learned this much during the careful dance of conversation that followed her offer of hot chocolate. He sat rigid in the passenger seat of her Honda, shoulders hunched against invisible threats, eyes darting between her face and the hospital's glowing windows. "My mama's real sick," he said finally, his small hands wrapped around the steaming cup she'd bought from the vending machine. "The doctors, they say—" His voice trailed off, lost in the weight of words too heavy for a child to carry. Sarah's heart clenched. She'd seen this look before, the particular devastation that settled over children when they began to understand that adults, even doctors, couldn't fix everything. "What's your mama's name, sweetheart?" "Elena Rodriguez." The name came out in a whisper. "She's on the 4th floor, room 412. Sarah's blood turned to ice water, room 412. She knew that room intimately, had checked on its occupant just hours ago during her shift. Elena Rodriguez, 32 years old, end-stage cervical cancer, admitted 3 days ago when the pain became unbearable. No insurance, no emergency contacts listed, and according to the social worker's notes, no known family. But here was Marcus, this boy who'd been keeping vigil at a cross in the freezing cold, praying for his dying mother while the system failed to connect the dots. "Marcus," Sarah said carefully, "where have you been staying?" His jaw tightened with the stubborn pride she recognized in children who'd learned too early that the world was unreliable. "Around. I got places. Have you been eating?" The question hung in the air between them. Marcus took another sip of hot chocolate, and Sarah noticed how his thin fingers trembled slightly around the cup, not from cold anymore, but from exhaustion and hunger, and the terrible stress of carrying burdens no child should know. "Sometimes the church ladies give out sandwiches," he admitted, "and there's a place downtown on Tuesdays." Sarah closed her eyes briefly, imagining this small boy navigating the city's shelters and soup kitchens while his mother lay dying just floors above where they sat. The administrative failures that had allowed this to happen made her stomach turn, but anger wouldn't help Marcus now. "When did you last see your mama?" "Yesterday morning. But the nurse, not you, a different one, she said I couldn't come back because I wasn't on some list." His voice cracked slightly. "I tried to explain, but she called security, and this big man said if I came back they'd call the police." Sarah felt something fierce and protective rise in her chest. She thought of her own baby, still months from being born, and the overwhelming love she already felt for that tiny life. How could any mother face death knowing her child was alone on the streets? How could any system fail so completely? "Marcus, I work here. I know your mama." She watched his eyes widen with desperate hope. "Would you like me to take you to see her?" The transformation in his face was immediate and heartbreaking. The careful walls he'd built crumbled, revealing the frightened little boy beneath. "Really? You can do that? They won't stop us?" "They won't stop us," Sarah promised, though she knew she was about to break several hospital policies. Some rules, she decided, were meant to be broken when a dying woman needed her son and a lost boy needed his mother. As they rode the elevator to the 4th floor, Marcus pressed close to her side, no longer the wary street child, but simply a scared kid who missed his mama. Sarah found herself thinking about her own pregnancy, about the baby who would arrive in 4 months, about the fierce love that was already reshaping every corner of her world. "Miss Sarah?" Marcus's voice was small in the elevator's quiet hum. "Do you think—" Do you think God really hears prayers, even from kids like me? The question pierced straight through her chest. Sarah looked down at this boy who'd been praying desperately at a wooden cross, abandoned by every system meant to protect him, yet still holding on to hope. She thought about her own prayers lately, for her baby's health, for her marriage, for the strength to navigate the changes ahead. "I think," she said carefully, "that sometimes God's answers look different than what we expect. But yes, Marcus, I think he hears every word." The elevator dinged softly as they reached the 4th floor. Through the doors, Sarah could see the familiar hallway, the soft lighting of the overnight shift, the quiet bustle of nurses making their rounds. Somewhere down that hall, Elena Rodriguez was dying without knowing her son was safe. But that was about to change. Marcus slipped his small hand into hers as they stepped out together, and Sarah realized that sometimes the most important work happened in the spaces between protocol and compassion, in the choice to see beyond policy to the human hearts that needed healing. The boy's name was Marcus, and he was 8 years old. Sarah learned this during their silent walk through the hospital corridors, his small hand occasionally brushing against hers as they navigated the maze of fluorescent-lit hallways. He moved with the cautious steps of someone who had learned early that the world could shift beneath your feet without warning. Room 314 was at the end of the pediatric wing, where the walls were painted in cheerful yellows and blues that seemed to mock the gravity of what lay within. Sarah had been in this room countless times, but never as a visitor bringing someone's son to say goodbye. The woman in the bed was barely recognizable as human. Machines surrounded her like mechanical vultures, their digital displays painting her gaunt face in shifting colors of red and green. Her breathing was labored, each rise and fall of her chest a small victory against the inevitable. Sarah's trained eye took in the details. The 4 drips, the oxygen cannula, the monitors that told a story she'd read too many times before. But it was Marcus who captured her attention. The moment he saw his mother, something in his small frame seemed to both collapse and strengthen simultaneously. He approached the bed with reverence, as if entering a sacred space. "Aye, Mama," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the hum of machinery. "I brought someone. Her name is Sarah, and she has a baby in her tummy too." Sarah felt her breath catch. "Two?" She studied the woman more carefully, noting the slight roundness beneath the hospital gown that she'd initially attributed to bloating. But now, with Marcus's words hanging in the air, she recognized what she should have seen immediately. "How far along is she?" Sarah asked gently. Marcus looked up at her with eyes that held too much knowledge for his age. "The doctors say the baby will come soon. Maybe tomorrow, maybe tonight. But Mama might not—" He couldn't finish the sentence. The full weight of the situation settled on Sarah's shoulders. This woman, this dying woman, was about to give birth. And Marcus, this 8-year-old boy, was about to become both an orphan and a brother in the span of hours. "Where's your family, Marcus? Grandparents, aunts or uncles?" He shook his head slowly. "Just me and Mama. And the baby." He reached out to touch his mother's hand, his small fingers intertwining with her pale ones. "That's why I was praying at the cross. I asked God to help the baby, even if he can't help Mama anymore." Sarah had to turn away for a moment, pressing her hand to her own rounded belly where her daughter moved restlessly, as if sensing the tragedy unfolding around them. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was about to welcome new life while grieving the loss of her marriage, and here was Marcus about to lose the only parent he'd ever known while gaining a sibling he'd have to protect. "Has anyone talked to you about what happens after?" she asked carefully. "Social services lady came yesterday. Said I'll go to a foster home. Said the baby will too, probably a different one." His voice was matter-of-fact, but Sarah caught the tremor underneath. "But I promised Mama I'd take care of the baby. I promised." The machines around them continued their electronic symphony, marking time in beeps and whirs. Sarah watched as Marcus began to hum softly, the same melody she'd heard at the cross. It was Silent Night, she realized, but sung with a heartbreak that transformed the familiar Christmas carol. into something entirely different. She used to sing to me, Marcus explained when he noticed Sarah listening. Before she got sick, before we lost our apartment. She said music was the only thing that couldn't be taken away. Sarah felt tears threatening and blinked them back. In her pocket, her phone buzzed with what was probably another message from David's lawyer. The divorce papers waiting for her signature seemed impossibly trivial now, her own problems dwarfed by the magnitude of what this little boy was facing. "Marcus," she said softly, kneeling beside his chair so they were at eye level, "would you like me to stay with you tonight? I'm a nurse here, and I could make sure both you and your mama are taken care of." For the first time since she'd met him, Marcus's carefully maintained composure cracked. Tears spilled down his cheeks as he nodded, and Sarah found herself pulling him into her arms. This brave little boy who smelled of winter air and unwashed clothes and something indefinably sweet that might have been hope. As she held him, Sarah felt her daughter kick strongly against her ribs, and a thought began to form in her mind, dangerous and impossible and absolutely right. Sometimes miracles didn't come as answered prayers, but as unexpected opportunities to become the answer to someone else's prayer. The monitors continued their steady rhythm, marking time toward an uncertain dawn. The emergency department buzzing around her felt surreal as Sarah sat in the small consultation room, her hands trembling slightly as she waited for Dr. Martinez to return with the test results. She'd insisted on coming straight to work after leaving Danny at the shelter, hoping that routine would steady her nerves, but the weight of the morning's revelations made everything feel off-kilter. When Dr. Martinez finally entered with a clipboard and a gentle smile, Sarah already knew what he was going to tell her. She'd suspected for weeks, had been avoiding the confirmation she now desperately needed. "Congratulations, Sarah. You're about 12 weeks along. Everything looks perfectly healthy." The words should have filled her with joy. Instead, they crashed over her like a wave, mixing with the emotional turmoil that Danny's story had stirred up. She pressed her hand to her abdomen, feeling the slight curve that her scrubs had been hiding. "Thank you," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Martinez studied her with concern. "Are you all right? This should be happy news." Sarah forced a smile. "It is. It's just unexpected." As she left the consultation room, her mind raced with calculations and complications. Michael would be thrilled. They'd been trying for 2 years. But the timing felt impossibly cruel. Here she was carrying the child they'd dreamed of, while somewhere in the city Danny sat beside his dying mother, praying for a miracle that might never come. The afternoon shift passed in a blur of patients and procedures, but Sarah found herself distracted, her thoughts constantly drifting to the little boy with Marcus's eyes. During her break, she called the shelter to check on Danny, learning that he'd barely eaten and had spent most of the day staring out the window. When her shift ended, Sarah made a decision that surprised even her. Instead of heading home to share her news with Michael, she drove to Children's Hospital. The pediatric wing felt different in the evening light, softer somehow, with dimmed hallways and the gentle murmur of visiting families. Sarah found Elena Reyes's room easily enough. Danny had mentioned the room number during one of his rambling stories about his mother's care. Through the small window in the door, Sarah saw her. Elena Reyes lay motionless in the hospital bed, her dark hair spread across the pillow, her face gaunt but still beautiful. Even unconscious, there was something familiar about her features, something that made Sarah's breath catch in her throat. "Can I help you?" Sarah turned to find a young nurse approaching, her expression professional but kind. "I'm Sarah Thompson, from General Hospital Emergency. I was hoping to speak with someone about Elena Reyes's condition. I know her son." The nurse, whose badge read Jessica, softened immediately. "Poor Danny. Are you the one who found him? We've all been so worried. He's been coming here every day for months, sometimes sleeping in the waiting room until security had to ask him to leave." "How long has she been like this?" 3 weeks in the coma, but she's been sick much longer. Ovarian cancer, stage 4. Dr. Patterson has been managing her case, but..." Jessica's voice trailed off. the implication clear. Sarah nodded, feeling a familiar tightness in her chest. She'd seen enough terminal cases to recognize the signs, even from a distance. Elena Reyes was dying, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. The boy mentioned something about his father, Sarah said carefully. Does she have any family listed as emergency contacts? Sarah's heart began to race. Do you know what was in the picture? Some businessman, I think. Danny said his mother told him his father was successful, that he lived in a big house and drove a fancy car. Honestly, we all thought it might be a story Elena made up to help Danny feel better about his father not being around. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Patterson, a tired-looking man in his 50s who greeted Jessica warmly before turning to Sarah with polite curiosity. After quick introductions, he confirmed what Sarah already suspected. Elena had perhaps days, maybe a week at most. As Sarah finally drove home that evening, her hand kept drifting to her belly, to the tiny life growing there. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was creating life while Danny was losing the only family he'd ever known. And, somewhere in the tangle of coincidence and connection, she couldn't shake the feeling that their stories were meant to intersect. The big house on Maple Street felt almost oppressive when she pulled into the driveway, its perfect landscaping and expensive fixtures a stark contrast to the world Danny inhabited. The fluorescent lights of the hospital corridor buzzed overhead as Sarah made her way to the pediatric ward, Marcus walking quietly beside her. His small hand gripped the visitor's badge she'd managed to secure for him, his knuckles white with nervous tension. She'd called ahead to Dr. Peterson, explaining the situation in careful, measured terms that wouldn't raise too many eyebrows about protocol. Remember what we talked about, Sarah said softly as they approached room 314. Your mom might look different than you remember. The medications and treatments can change how people appear, but she's still your mom underneath it all. Marcus nodded, his Adam's apple bobbing as he swallowed hard. Will she know me? We'll find out together. Sarah paused outside the door, her hand resting on the handle. Through the small window, she could see a figure lying motionless in the bed, connected to various monitors and tubes. The woman appeared gaunt, her dark hair thin against the white pillow. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Something about the profile seemed familiar, though she couldn't place it. The door opened with a soft whoosh, and they stepped inside. The room smelled of antiseptic and the faint sweetness of the flowers someone had left on the windowsill. Marcus froze just inside the doorway, his eyes wide as he took in the sight of his mother. Mama? His voice was barely a whisper. The woman's eyelids fluttered, then slowly opened. Her gaze was unfocused at first, searching the ceiling before settling on the small figure standing near the door. Recognition dawned gradually, like sunrise breaking through clouds. Marcus? Her voice was hoarse, barely audible above the quiet beeping of the monitors. My baby. Is it really you? He rushed to her bedside, careful not to disturb the foreline as he reached for her hand. Sarah watched from near the door, giving them space while keeping close enough to intervene if needed. The reunion was heartbreaking and beautiful simultaneously, two people who had found each other again despite impossible odds. I've been looking for you everywhere, Mama. They took me away, and I couldn't find you. And then I heard you were sick. Marcus's words tumbled out in a rush, tears streaming down his cheeks. His mother, Elena, according to the chart Sarah had glimpsed, lifted a trembling hand to touch his face. I'm sorry, baby. I'm so sorry I wasn't strong enough to keep us together. Sarah felt her own eyes welling up as she watched the tender scene, but something nagged at her, a persistent feeling that she was missing something important. She studied Elena's face more carefully, noting the bone structure beneath the illness-induced weight loss, the shape of her eyes, the way she held her mouth when she spoke. Mrs. Rodriguez? Sarah stepped forward, her voice uncertain. I'm Sarah, one of the nurses here. I've been taking care of Marcus. Elena's gaze shifted to Sarah, and when their eyes met, Sarah felt a jolt of recognition so powerful it nearly knocked her backward. Those eyes, dark brown with flecks of gold, slightly tilted at the corners. She knew those eyes. Sarah Chen? Elena's voice was filled with disbelief. From nursing school? The room seemed to tilt sideways as memories came flooding back. Study groups that lasted until dawn, clinical rotations where they'd supported each other through difficult cases, late-night conversations about their dreams of making a difference in healthcare. Elena Martinez, before she'd married and become Elena Rodriguez, had been Sarah's closest friend during their nursing program. Elena, oh my God, Elena. Sarah moved closer to the bed, her professional composure cracking. I wondered what happened to you after graduation. You just disappeared. Life got complicated. Elena's smile was sad but genuine. I got married, had Marcus, and then... She gestured weakly at her surroundings. Things fell apart. David left when Marcus was 3 and I couldn't keep up with everything. The bills, the stress. I started using to cope. Sarah reached out and gently squeezed Elena's free hand, the one not being held by Marcus. I wish I'd known. I could have helped. You're helping now, Elena whispered, looking between Sarah and her son. You found my boy and brought him back to me. That's more than I ever dared hope for. Marcus looked up at Sarah with new understanding in his eyes. You knew my mama before? I did. She was one of the smartest, kindest people I knew in school. She helped me through some really tough times. Sarah smiled through her tears. She used to say that sometimes the universe puts people exactly where they need to be. Elena squeezed both their hands weakly. Maybe this is one of those times. As if summoned by the emotional weight of the moment, Dr. Peterson appeared in the doorway, his expression grave. Sarah caught his eye and saw the subtle shake of his head. The news he carried wasn't good. The morning sun filtered through the hospital cafeteria windows as Emma sat across from Marcus, watching him methodically eat scrambled eggs with the focused intensity of someone who hadn't known when his next meal might come. 3 days had passed since she'd brought him to the hospital, and while Sarah's condition remained critical, the antibiotics were finally showing promise. She asked for you yesterday, Marcus said quietly, not looking up from his plate. When she was awake for a few minutes, Emma's heart squeezed. What did she say? She wanted to know if you were real or if she dreamed you. He finally met her eyes. I told her you were real, but I think she's still not sure. Neither am I, Emma thought, touching her belly where the baby had been unusually active all morning. Ever since finding Marcus at the cross, her carefully ordered world had tilted on its axis. She'd called in favors, bent rules, and found herself lying awake at night thinking about a homeless woman she'd never met, and a boy whose resilience both broke and inspired her. Emma. Dr. Rodriguez appeared beside their table, his expression unreadable. Can I speak with you privately? Her stomach dropped. She'd been dreading this conversation, knowing that eventually someone would question her involvement with Marcus and his mother. Hospital policy was clear about procedures for homeless patients, especially minors without proper guardians. I'll be right back, she told Marcus, following Dr. Rodriguez to a quiet corner near the vending machines. The social worker came by this morning, he began, and Emma braced herself. There are questions about the boy's situation, legal questions. His mother is getting better. The fever broke yesterday, and her lung function is improving. That's not what I mean, and you know it. His voice was gentle but firm. Emma, I understand you've formed an attachment, but there are protocols. If Sarah doesn't recover fully, if she can't care for him properly, the state will need to intervene. The words hit her like a physical blow. She'd known this moment would come, had been trying not to think about it. He can't go into the system, Miguel. You don't understand what they've been through. Actually, I think I do. His expression softened. I've been making some calls, doing some research on Sarah Bennett. Did you know she used to be a registered nurse? Emma stared at him. What? St. Mary's Hospital in Phoenix. She worked there for 8 years before everything fell apart. Lost her license 3 years ago due to, he paused, due to circumstances that led to their current situation. The revelation sent Emma's mind reeling. A nurse. Sarah had been a nurse. Suddenly, the clinical way Marcus spoke about his mother's symptoms, his calm demeanor in the hospital, the way he seemed to understand medical terminology made perfect sense. "Miguel, I need to see her file. I need to understand what happened." "You know I can't do that. Patient confidentiality applies even to former colleagues." He studied her face carefully. "Emma, what aren't you telling me? This level of involvement, it's not like you. You're one of our most professional nurses, but with this case..." She wanted to tell him about the dreams, about the strange sense of recognition she'd felt when she first saw Marcus, about how looking at Sarah's unconscious face had triggered something deep and inexplicable, like staring into a mirror that reflected not her appearance but her soul. Instead, she simply said, "Sometimes you meet people who change everything. That's what worries me." Dr. Rodriguez glanced toward Marcus, who was now staring out the window. "The social worker wants to place him in temporary care while his mother recovers. It might be for the best." "No." The word came out sharper than she'd intended. "Give me 48 hours. Emma, please, just 2 more days. If Sarah doesn't improve enough to advocate for herself by then, I'll figure something out." He studied her for a long moment. 48 hours. "But Emma, don't do anything you'll regret. That baby you're carrying needs his mother to make smart choices." As he walked away, Emma felt the weight of an impossible decision settling on her shoulders. She returned to Marcus, who was now pushing his remaining eggs around his plate. "Bad news?" he asked without looking up. She sat down, struck again by his maturity. "Complicated news. But Marcus, I need you to tell me about your mother's work. Before you were homeless. She was a nurse, wasn't she?" His fork stilled. "How did you..." He looked up sharply. "You've been investigating us. I've been trying to help you." "That's what they always say." The bitterness in his voice caught her off guard. "Right before they decide what's best for us and tear everything apart." "Marcus, I promise you I'm not going anywhere. But I need to understand what happened, your mother's story, your story, because in 48 hours, some very difficult people are going to start asking very difficult questions, and I need to have answers." He stared at her for a long moment, as if weighing whether to trust her with the truth that had shaped his young life. The fluorescent lights of the hospital cafeteria buzzed overhead as Sarah sat across from Dr. Martinez, her hands wrapped around a lukewarm cup of coffee she hadn't touched. The revelation about Michael being her biological son still felt surreal, like a dream she might wake up from at any moment. "I need to see the records," Sarah said quietly. "Everything. The adoption papers, the medical files, all of it." Dr. Martinez nodded, understanding the weight of her request. "I've already put in the call to legal. Given the circumstances, they're expediting the process." She paused, studying Sarah's pale face. "How are you holding up?" Sarah let out a shaky laugh. "I don't know. Part of me wants to run straight to his room and tell him everything. The other part is terrified." She finally took a sip of her coffee and grimaced at the bitter taste. "What if he hates me for giving him up?" "Sarah, you were 17. You made an impossible choice in an impossible situation." The words didn't offer much comfort. Sarah had carried the guilt for 12 years, wondering about the baby boy she'd held for exactly 47 minutes before the social worker took him away. She'd memorized every detail of his face during those precious moments. The way his tiny fingers had curled around hers, the soft downy hair on his head, the birthmark shaped like a crescent moon just behind his left ear. The same birthmark she'd noticed when she'd helped Michael wash up 2 days ago. "I need to check on Elena," Sarah said, standing abruptly. The chair scraped against the linoleum floor with a harsh sound that made her wince. Dr. Martinez reached out and touched her arm gently. "The legal department should have those files ready within the hour. Will you be okay until then?" Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice to remain steady. She made her way through the hospital corridors on autopilot, her mind racing. 12 years of wondering, of imagining what her son might look like, what kind of life he was living, whether he was happy. Never in her worst nightmares had she pictured him homeless, hungry and watching his adoptive mother die. When she reached Elena's room, she found Michael exactly where she'd left him, curled up in the uncomfortable visitor's chair, his small hand resting on the edge of his mother's bed. Elena was awake, her breathing labored, but her eyes alert. "How are you feeling?" Sarah asked softly, checking Elena's chart and adjusting her drip. "Better knowing someone is watching over Michael," Elena whispered. Her voice was barely audible, but her gratitude was unmistakable. "You've been so kind to us. I don't know how to repay you." Sarah's throat tightened. "You don't need to repay anything. I just want to help." Elena's eyes, so much like Michael's, studied Sarah's face. "You look tired. You should go home, rest. We'll be fine." "I want to stay," Sarah said, surprised by the intensity in her own voice. She caught herself and added more quietly, I'm working a double shift anyway." Michael stirred in his chair, blinking awake. When he saw Sarah, his face lit up with a smile that made her heart ache. "Miss Sarah, did you bring more of those crackers?" "I did," she said, pulling a small package from her pocket. "And some juice boxes." As Michael eagerly opened the crackers, Sarah noticed how he automatically saved half, wrapping them carefully in the napkin. Even as a child, he was thinking of others first, making sure his mother would have something to eat later. "Michael," Elena said weakly, "why don't you tell Miss Sarah about the story you were reading in the library yesterday?" Michael's eyes brightened. It was about a knight who was looking for his family. He traveled all over the kingdom, asking everyone if they'd seen them. And just when he was about to give up, he found out the wise woman who'd been helping him all along was really his mother, but she'd been under a spell and couldn't tell him. Sarah felt her breath catch. "That sounds like a beautiful story." "The best part was the ending," Michael continued, his voice animated despite his exhaustion. "When the spell broke, they both cried happy tears because they'd been looking for each other the whole time without knowing it." Elena reached out and smoothed Michael's hair. "Sometimes the people we need most are closer than we think." Sarah excused herself and stepped into the hallway, her composure finally cracking. She leaned against the wall, pressing her hand to her mouth to muffle the sob that escaped. The irony of Michael's story wasn't lost on her. Here she was, the mother he'd never known, caring for him while he remained oblivious to their connection. Her phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Martinez. "Files are ready. Meet me in my office when you can." Sarah took a deep breath, steeling herself. In a few minutes, she'd have the official confirmation of what her heart already knew. The question that terrified her most wasn't whether Michael was her son. It was what she'd do with that knowledge, and whether she'd have the courage to tell him the truth. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Sarah sat in the hospital's family conference room, her hands trembling around a cup of cold coffee. Across from her, Dr. Martinez leaned forward with the compassionate expression she'd seen him wear countless times with other families. Never had she imagined being on this side of that look. "The paternity test confirms it," he said gently. "Tommy is indeed your biological nephew. Your brother Michael was his father." The words hit her like a physical blow, even though she'd suspected this truth since yesterday. Sarah's hand instinctively moved to her growing belly, feeling the flutter of movement within. Her own child would never know their cousin, just as she'd never had the chance to know her brother had become a father. "How?" she whispered. "How did Michael end up on the streets with a child? Why didn't he reach out?" Dr. Martinez consulted the file before him. "From what we've pieced together through social services and hospital records, Michael and Rebecca, Tommy's mother, met at a rehabilitation center 3 years ago. They were both struggling with addiction, but they found stability in each other for a while." Sarah remembered those months when Michael had seemed better, when his calls home were more frequent and hopeful. She'd thought he was finally getting clean for good. "What happened?" David asked from beside her, his hand finding hers under the table. "Rebecca became pregnant, and initially, it motivated them both to stay sober. Michael even held down a job at a warehouse for several months. But when Tommy was born with some health complications requiring extended hospital stays, The stress overwhelmed them. Michael relapsed first, then Rebecca followed. The room felt like it was spinning. Sarah closed her eyes, trying to imagine her brother, the same person who used to read her bedtime stories and build elaborate blanket forts, struggling to care for a newborn while battling his demons. They lost their apartment. 6 months later, Dr. Martinez continued. Child Services briefly took custody of Tommy, but Rebecca got him back after completing a program. That's when they disappeared into the homeless community. Michael left around the time Tommy turned 2. He left them? Sarah's voice cracked. The brother she remembered would never abandon a child, but addiction had stolen so much of who Michael really was. According to Rebecca's medical records from the free clinic, Michael couldn't handle watching his addiction hurt his family. He thought leaving would protect them, that Rebecca could get assistance as a single mother more easily. David squeezed Sarah's hand tighter. That must have been when Tommy stopped remembering him clearly. Rebecca tried, but her illness progressed faster than anyone expected. The cancer was aggressive, and by the time she sought treatment, there wasn't much we could do. She'd been hiding how sick she was from Tommy, trying to stay strong for him. Sarah thought of the brave little boy sitting vigil by his mother's bedside, and her heart shattered completely. Where is Tommy now? He's with a temporary foster family, but Sarah... Dr. Martinez's expression grew more serious. As his biological aunt and closest living relative, you have the right to petition for custody. However, given your pregnancy and the fact that you're not married, the process won't be automatic. What does that mean? David asked, his voice taking on a protective edge. It means social services will need to evaluate whether Sarah can provide a stable home for Tommy while preparing for her own child. They'll consider financial stability, support systems, living arrangements, everything. Sarah's mind raced. Her small apartment, her demanding work schedule, her own complicated pregnancy, none of it seemed adequate for a traumatized 8-year-old who'd just lost everything. I want to see him, she said suddenly. Can I see Tommy? Of course. He's been asking about you, actually. He remembers you visiting his mother. As they prepared to leave the conference room, Dr. Martinez called Sarah back. There's one more thing. Rebecca left something for Tommy. She made me promise to give it to him when the time came. He handed Sarah a small wrapped package, clearly prepared by shaking hands. The paper was wrinkled Christmas wrap, probably salvaged from somewhere, and the ribbon was a simple piece of string. She wrapped this herself, just days before she passed. She was so weak, but she insisted on doing it personally. Sarah held the package carefully, feeling its slight weight. Whatever was inside represented a dying mother's final gift to her son, a tangible piece of love to carry forward. Walking through the hospital corridors toward the pediatric wing where Tommy waited, Sarah felt the full weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. In a matter of days, her entire world had shifted. She was about to become not just a mother to her unborn child, but potentially the guardian of her brother's son, a boy who carried within him both the tragedy of Michael's choices and the possibility of redemption. The Christmas lights strung along the hospital walls seemed brighter somehow, as if illuminating a path forward she couldn't yet fully see but knew she had to take. The fluorescent lights of the hospital corridor cast harsh shadows as Elena hurried toward the pediatric ward, her heart hammering against her ribs. The DNA results clutched in her trembling hand felt heavier than the weight of her growing belly. She had read them 3 times in the parking lot, each reading confirming what seemed impossible. David was her nephew, the boy she had been caring for. The child who had captured her heart with his fierce devotion to his dying mother was Michael's son, her brother's son, the brother who had vanished 8 years ago after a devastating fight with their father about his addiction, his choices, his life spiraling out of control. Elena paused outside room 314, watching through the small window as David sat beside the bed where a gaunt woman lay unconscious, machines beeping steadily around her. The woman who must be Sarah, the name on the medical charts, the name David whispered when he thought no one was listening. Elena studied her face, searching for traces of the brother she remembered, in the sharp cheekbones, the dark hair now streaked with premature grey. But it was David who carried Michael's features most clearly. The stubborn set of his jaw when he refused to leave his mother's side, the way his left eyebrow quirked up when he was thinking, the unconscious habit of running his fingers through his hair when he was worried. How had she not seen it before? "You're back." Dr. Martinez appeared beside her, clipboard in hand. "I was hoping to catch you. We need to discuss the boy's situation." Elena's throat felt dry as sandpaper. "What about it?" "Social services is getting involved. The mother's condition isn't improving, and David has no other family that we can locate, no identification, no records. He'll need to be placed in temporary care while we sort everything out." The words hit Elena like a physical blow. He can't leave her. It would destroy him. Dr. Martinez's expression softened. "I understand your attachment to the case, Elena, but we have protocols. The boy needs stability, proper care. He's been living on the streets. How long does she have?" The question came out as barely a whisper. "Days, maybe a week. The damage to her organs is extensive. I'm surprised she's held on this long, honestly. It's like she's fighting to stay for him." Elena pressed her palm against the cool glass of the window. Inside, David was reading aloud from a tattered book, his young voice carrying a story about brave knights and distant kingdoms. The same stories Michael used to read to her when she was small, before their father's drinking got worse, before their family fractured beyond repair. "What if I told you he does have family?" Elena heard herself saying. Dr. Martinez looked up sharply from his clipboard. "What do you mean?" Elena's mind raced. She thought of Tom, waiting at home with dinner probably growing cold on the table. Tom, who had been patient with her extended hours, her emotional investment in this case. Tom, who deserved to know the truth before she made any decisions that would change their lives forever. But looking at David, seeing the exhaustion in his small shoulders, the way he held vigil over his mother with a devotion that broke her heart, Elena knew she couldn't walk away. Family wasn't just biology, it was choice, commitment, love in action. "I need to make some calls," she said finally. "Can you give me until tomorrow before involving social services?" Dr. Martinez studied her carefully. "Elena, what aren't you telling me?" Before she could answer, David looked up and saw her through the window. His face lit up with the first genuine smile she had seen from him in days. He waved, and she waved back, feeling tears sting her eyes. 24 hours, Dr. Martinez said quietly. "That's all I can give you." Elena nodded and pushed open the door to the room. David immediately launched into an update about his mother's condition, how her breathing seemed steadier today, how he was sure he saw her eyelids flutter earlier. "She's going to wake up," he said with the fierce certainty of childhood. "I know she is." Elena sat down in the chair beside him, studying his profile. She could see Michael in every angle, every expression. But she could also see something Michael had lost long ago, hope. "David," she said gently, "I want to ask you something about your family, about your father." The boy's face shuttered immediately. "I don't have a father." "Everyone has a father, honey, even if he's not around." David was quiet for a long moment, his fingers tracing patterns on the hospital blanket. "Mom said he got sick, not like her sick, but sick in his head. She said he loved us, but the sickness was stronger." Elena's heart clenched. "What was his name?" David glanced at his mother's still form, then back at Elena. "Michael," he whispered. "His name was Michael." The social services office felt like a tomb, all beige walls and fluorescent lighting that drained the life from everything it touched. Sarah sat in the uncomfortable plastic chair, her hands folded protectively over her growing belly, while Marcus fidgeted beside her. The boy had barely spoken since they'd arrived an hour ago, his dark eyes darting between the door and the windows like a trapped animal calculating escape routes. "I don't want to go to a foster home," Marcus whispered for the third time, his voice barely audible above the hum of the air conditioning. Sarah reached over and squeezed his shoulder. "We're going to figure this out, I promise." The promise felt hollow in her mouth. She'd made calls, filled out forms, pleaded with caseworkers, but the system moved with the speed of cold honey. Emergency placement was the only option they were offering, and Sarah's heart broke imagining this boy, who had already lost so much, being shuffled into a stranger's home just days before Christmas. Sarah Chen, a tired-looking woman in her 50s, appeared in the doorway, clipboard in hand. "I'm Janet Morrison, Marcus's caseworker." Sarah stood, noting how Marcus seemed to shrink further into his chair. "Thank you for meeting with us on such short notice." Janet's expression was professionally sympathetic but worn down by years of impossible cases. "I've reviewed the situation. I'm sorry for your loss, Marcus. Your mother spoke of you often during her stays at the hospital." Marcus's head snapped up. "You knew my mom?" "I worked with her case several times over the years. Elena was... she tried very hard to get clean." "For you." Janet's voice softened slightly. "But right now, we need to focus on your immediate placement. We have a family in Riverside who can take you temporarily." "No." Marcus shot to his feet. "I told you, I'm not going anywhere." Sarah felt something fierce and protective surge in her chest. "What about kinship placement? I've been caring for him since his mother died. We have a connection." Janet consulted her clipboard. "Miss Chen, while I appreciate your concern, you're not a relative. Kinship placement requires..." "What if I want her to be my family?" Marcus's voice cracked. "What if I choose her?" The question hung in the air like incense, heavy and sacred. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes as she looked at this brave, broken boy who had somehow decided she was worth trusting. Janet sighed. "It's not that simple. There are background checks, home studies, financial evaluations. The process takes months, sometimes years." "And in the meantime?" Sarah asked. "Emergency foster care." Sarah watched Marcus's face crumple, watched him try to hide it by turning toward the window. Outside, the December sky was grey and threatening snow. Christmas was in 3 days. "There has to be another option," Sarah said. "What about emergency kinship placement? I'm a nurse, I have stable housing, stable income. I've been caring for him." "For 3 days," Janet interrupted, not unkindly. "The state requires more than good intentions." Sarah's mind raced. David would know what to do. He understood the legal system in ways she didn't. But David was at his parents' house, probably sitting around their perfect Christmas tree, explaining to his perfect family why his fiancée wasn't there. The thought of calling him now, of admitting that she was sitting in social services fighting for a boy she'd known less than a week, felt impossible. "What if we could expedite the process?" Sarah asked. "Christmas emergency consideration?" Janet looked skeptical. "What exactly are you proposing?" "Give me until after New Year's. Temporary emergency placement with me while we fast-track the paperwork. You said yourself his mother trusted me enough to bring him to the hospital. That has to count for something." Marcus turned back from the window, hope flickering in his eyes like a candle flame in the wind. "Miss Chen," Janet said carefully, "I understand you want to help, but taking on a child, especially one who's experienced trauma, it's not like fostering a puppy. This is a human being with complex needs. And you're pregnant. Have you really thought this through?" Sarah's hand moved instinctively to her belly. Had she thought it through? 3 days ago, her biggest worry was whether to serve red or white wine at her engagement party. Now she was sitting in a government office trying to keep a grieving 11-year-old out of the foster system. "No," she said quietly. "I haven't thought it through. But sometimes the most important decisions can't be thought through. Sometimes you just have to trust that the universe puts people in your path for a reason." Janet studied her for a long moment, then looked at Marcus, who was holding his breath. "I'll make some calls," she said finally. "But this is highly irregular, and if I can make this work, it's temporary. You understand that?" Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. Marcus didn't say anything, but when he slipped his small hand into hers, Sarah felt something shift inside her chest, a lock clicking open, a door swinging wide. The DNA test results arrived on a Tuesday morning that felt heavy with possibility. Sarah held the sealed envelope in trembling hands, staring at her name printed in stark black letters. Marcus sat beside her on the hospital break-room couch, his small frame rigid with anticipation. "Whatever it says," she whispered, "nothing changes how I feel about you." Marcus nodded, but she could see the hope burning in his eyes, the same desperate hope that had kept him praying at that cross night after night. She carefully tore open the envelope, unfolding the clinical document that would either confirm their impossible connection or leave them as two souls who had simply found each other in the darkness. The words blurred as tears filled her eyes. 99.9% probability. Marcus was her son. "What does it say?" His voice was barely audible. Sarah pulled him into her arms, holding him as tightly as she dared. "You're my baby," she sobbed. "You're my little boy." Marcus broke down then, 13 years of abandonment and longing pouring out in gut-wrenching sobs. Sarah rocked him gently, whispering apologies and promises, trying to heal wounds that had festered far too long. When their tears finally subsided, Marcus pulled back to look at her. "Why did you give me away?" The question she dreaded cut through her heart. Sarah took a shaky breath, knowing she owed him the complete truth. "I was 15, Marcus. My parents, they said I wasn't ready to be a mother. They arranged everything with the adoption agency. I wanted to keep you so badly, but I was just a scared kid myself. Did you ever try to find me?" "Every day for the past 18 years. The adoption was supposed to be closed, but I hired investigators, contacted agencies, even had a website hoping you might look for me someday. When I became a nurse, part of me wondered if I'd somehow know you if I saw you." Her voice broke. "I should have recognized you immediately. I'm so sorry." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, processing everything. "Catherine, my adoptive mom, she told me you were young. She said you loved me but couldn't take care of me. Catherine sounds like a wonderful woman. I'm grateful she loved you. She did. Even when things got hard after her husband left, she never made me feel like a burden." His eyes filled with fresh tears. "I wish she could know I found you." Sarah's heart ached for the woman who had raised her son, who had given him the love and stability she couldn't provide at 15. "She does know, sweetheart. Somehow she knows." Dr. Harrison appeared in the doorway, his expression carefully neutral. "Sarah, I heard about the test results. Congratulations." He paused, studying them both. "There are some legal matters we need to discuss." Sarah's stomach dropped. "What kind of legal matters?" "Well, Marcus is a minor without a guardian. Technically, he's been in the care of the state since Catherine's death. There will be paperwork, home studies, background checks. Even though you're his biological mother, you'll need to go through proper channels to regain custody. How long will that take? Could be weeks, maybe months. In the meantime, he'll need to stay in temporary foster care unless what? Unless we can find a qualified relative or family friend willing to provide temporary guardianship while the paperwork is processed." Sarah felt Marcus tense beside her. After everything they'd been through, after finally finding each other, the system threatened to separate them again. "I'll take him." They all turned to see David standing in the doorway, his face set with determination. Sarah's heart lurched. She'd been so focused on Marcus that she'd barely spoken to David since the DNA test. "David, you don't understand the complexity." "I understand perfectly," he interrupted, stepping into the room. "Marcus needs a safe place to stay while Sarah navigates the legal process. I'm a doctor with a clean record and a stable home. I can provide that." Sarah stared at him, overwhelmed by his willingness to help despite everything that had happened between them. "Why would you do this?" David's eyes met hers, and she saw something there that made her breath catch. "Because you love him, and because—" He paused, seeming to struggle with his words. "Because I think I'm falling in love with both of you." The admission hung in the air like a prayer. Marcus looked between them, confusion and hope warring in his expression. "You'd really let me stay with you?" Marcus asked David. "If it means keeping you and your mom together while we figure this out, absolutely." Sarah felt something shift inside her chest, a door opening that she'd thought was permanently sealed. David wasn't running from the complexity of her situation. He was stepping directly into it, offering to help shoulder the burden. "There's something else," Dr. Harrison said gently. "The social worker will want to interview all of you. They'll need to understand the full situation before approving any temporary arrangements." Sarah nodded, suddenly exhausted but also strangely hopeful. They had found each other against impossible odds. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The fluorescent lights of the hospital conference room cast harsh shadows across Detective Morrison's weathered face as he spread the DNA test results across the table. Sarah sat rigidly in her chair, David's small hand clutched in hers, while Marcus positioned himself protectively behind them both. "The results are conclusive," Morrison said quietly. "David is your biological son, Sarah." The words hung in the air like smoke, visible but impossible to grasp. Sarah had prepared herself for this moment, had known it was coming, but hearing it spoken aloud felt like stepping off a cliff into free fall. "How?" she whispered, though she already knew the answer would shatter what remained of her carefully constructed world. Morrison pulled out a thick file, his movements deliberate and gentle. "We've been investigating St. Mary's Hospital's records from 13 years ago. What we found—" He paused, glancing at David. "Perhaps the boy should—" "No," David said firmly. "I need to know. About my mom, about everything." Sarah squeezed his hand tighter. Whatever was coming, they would face it together. "There was a systematic cover-up," Morrison continued. Dr. Richard Blackwell, the chief of obstetrics at the time, was running an illegal adoption ring. He would tell unwed mothers their babies had died during delivery, then sell them to wealthy couples who couldn't conceive naturally. The room spun around Sarah. She remembered that night 13 years ago with crystalline clarity now. The emergency C-section, the frantic voices, waking up to be told her son had died. The grief that had nearly consumed her. "Elena Rodriguez was working as a janitor at the hospital then," Morrison said, opening another file. "She was young, desperate, struggling to make ends meet. When she witnessed what was happening, Blackwell paid her to keep quiet and gave her a baby to raise. Your baby, Sarah." He told her the child's mother had abandoned him. Marcus placed his hands on Sarah's shoulders as she began to tremble. "Elena never knew?" "Not until recently. We found a letter she wrote to you, Sarah, that was never sent. In it, she explained that David had started asking questions about his birth certificate. When she investigated, she discovered the truth about what Blackwell had done. She was planning to contact you when she got sick." Sarah felt the weight of 13 years of grief and loss reshaping itself into something else, a fury so pure it took her breath away. "Where is Blackwell now?" "He died 5 years ago. But his nurse, Patricia Mills, has agreed to testify about what happened in exchange for immunity. She kept records, Sarah. She has documentation of everything." David looked up at Sarah with those green eyes, her eyes, and she saw her own confusion reflected there. "So my whole life has been a lie?" "No, sweetheart," Sarah said, turning to face him fully. "Elena loved you. Everything she did for you, every sacrifice she made, that was real. She was your mother in every way that mattered. But you're my mother too," he said, his voice small and uncertain. "Yes, I am." The words felt foreign on her tongue, but also inevitable, like coming home after a long journey. "But that doesn't make what you had with Elena any less important." Morrison cleared his throat. "There's more. Elena's medical bills, the debts. Blackwell's estate is liable for damages. There's going to be a substantial settlement, enough to cover David's future, his education, everything." But Sarah barely heard him. She was studying David's face, seeing herself in the curve of his jaw, in the way he chewed his lip when he was thinking. 13 years of wondering, of grieving, of carrying an empty space in her chest where her child should have been. "What happens now?" Marcus asked quietly. Morrison gathered his papers. "That's up to you. David is Sarah's biological son. but given the circumstances, family services is willing to be flexible about custody arrangements. They want what's best for the boy. Sarah looked at David, this brave, brilliant child who had prayed at a Christmas cross for a miracle, who had lived on the streets rather than go into foster care, who had loved Elena fiercely even as she was dying. "What do you want, David?" she asked. He was quiet for a long moment, staring at their joined hands. "I want to stay with you, but I want to remember her too, Elena. I want to visit her grave and tell her stories and not forget that she was my mom first." "We'll visit her together," Sarah promised. "Every week if you want. We'll bring flowers and tell her everything that's happening. She saved you, David. She loved you when I couldn't. I'll never let you forget that." David nodded, tears streaming down his face. "Can I call you Mom?" "Oh, sweetheart," Sarah breathed, pulling him into her arms. "I've been waiting 13 years to hear you say that." As she held her son, Sarah felt the broken pieces of her heart rearranging themselves into something new, something whole. The miracle she'd prayed for hadn't come in the form she'd expected, but it had come nonetheless. The fluorescent lights in the hospital corridor cast harsh shadows as Sarah walked toward room 314, her heart pounding against her ribs. Each step felt weighted with the gravity of what she was about to do. The manila folder in her hands contained more than just medical records. It held the key to a truth that would either heal two broken souls or shatter them completely. Marcus sat beside his mother's bed, his small hand wrapped around her frail fingers. The steady beep of the heart monitor provided a rhythm to his whispered prayers. He looked up when Sarah entered, his eyes still holding that fierce protectiveness she'd come to admire. "How is she today?" Sarah asked softly, setting the folder on the small table by the window. "She woke up for a little while this morning," Marcus replied, hope threading through his voice. "She asked about you, said she remembered your voice from when she couldn't wake up before." Sarah's throat tightened. Elena's condition had stabilized, but her body remained fragile, worn down by years of hardship and untreated illness. The doctors were cautiously optimistic, but recovery would be a long journey. "Marcus, I need to talk to you about something important." Sarah pulled a chair closer to his, her movements deliberate and gentle. "It's about your mother, and about me, and about something that happened a long time ago." The boy's eyes narrowed slightly, that familiar wariness returning. "What kind of something?" Sarah opened the folder, revealing documents she'd spent sleepless nights reviewing. Birth certificates, adoption papers, hospital records, pieces of a puzzle that had taken her breath away when they'd finally clicked into place. "Do you know your mother's full name?" she asked. "Elena Vasquez," Marcus answered without hesitation. "But she used to be Elena Santos before my dad left." Sarah's hands trembled as she pulled out a faded birth certificate. "Marcus, your mother's maiden name, her name before she was married, was Elena Santos Rivera." The boy shrugged, not understanding the significance. Sarah took a deep breath, knowing the next words would change everything. 26 years ago, a 17-year-old girl gave birth to a baby at General Hospital downtown. She was scared, alone, and convinced she couldn't provide the life her child deserved. So she made the hardest decision a mother can make. She placed her baby for adoption. Marcus's grip on his mother's hand tightened, sensing the direction of the conversation. "That girl's name was Elena Santos Rivera," Sarah continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "And the baby she gave up was me." The silence that followed seemed to stretch across years of separation, across nights of wondering and days of longing. Marcus stared at Sarah, then at his mother, then back at Sarah, his young mind working to process the impossible coincidence. "You're saying," he began, his voice cracking, "I'm saying your mother is my birth mother. You're my brother, Marcus, my half-brother." The folder slipped from Sarah's lap as Marcus launched himself into her arms, his small body shaking with sobs he'd held back for too long. Sarah held him tight, tears streaming down her face as she breathed in the scent of his hair, something familiar she'd never been able to place until now. "I prayed for a miracle," Marcus whispered against her shoulder. "But I didn't know. I never thought." "Neither did I," Sarah murmured, stroking his back. But sometimes miracles come in ways we never expect. They held each other as the afternoon sun slanted through the hospital window, casting a warm glow over Elena's sleeping form. Sarah looked at her birth mother's face, seeing her own features reflected there, the shape of the eyes, the curve of the jaw, the stubborn set of the chin she'd inherited. "What happens now?" Marcus asked, pulling back to look at her with eyes that mirrored her own. Sarah cupped his face gently. "Now we become the family we were meant to be. When your mom gets better, you're both coming home with me, if you want to. Really, you mean it, I mean it. You'll never be homeless again, Marcus, and neither will she." As if summoned by their conversation, Elena's eyes fluttered open. She looked confused for a moment, then focused on Sarah's face with startling clarity. "I know you," she whispered, her voice hoarse but certain. "I've been dreaming about you for 26 years. Sarah moved to the bedside, taking Elena's other hand, while Marcus maintained his protective grip. "I know you too, Mom. I've been looking for you my whole life." Elena's eyes filled with tears as she looked between Sarah and Marcus. "My children," she breathed. "My beautiful children." Together, the heart monitor's rhythm seemed to strengthen as the three of them held each other. A family reunited not by chance, but by the mysterious grace that sometimes transforms our deepest pain into our greatest joy. Outside, snow began to fall, blanketing the city in the quiet promise of new beginnings. The hospital corridors felt different now, charged with an energy Sarah couldn't quite name. 3 days had passed since the DNA results arrived, confirming what her heart had already known. Michael was David's son, her son. The knowledge sat heavy in her chest, a mixture of overwhelming joy and crushing grief for all the lost years. She found herself walking toward the pediatric ward more frequently, drawn by an invisible thread. Dr. Martinez had cleared her for light duty, but Sarah's mind was anywhere except on her nursing responsibilities. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw David's face that first night at the Christmas cross, his small hands clasped in desperate prayer. "You're distracted today," Lisa observed, joining Sarah at the nurse's station. "Everything okay?" Sarah's fingers trembled as she sorted through patient charts. How could she explain that her entire world had shifted on its axis, that the homeless boy she'd been caring for was actually the child she'd given up 13 years ago? The child she'd never stopped loving, never stopped wondering about. "Just tired," she managed, though sleep had become elusive. Her dreams were filled with fragments: Michael's birth, his tiny fingers wrapped around hers, the agonizing decision to let him go, believing it was best for both of them. Down the hall, David sat beside his adoptive mother's bed, reading aloud from a worn copy of A Christmas Carol. Patricia's condition had stabilized, though she remained weak. The social worker had been by twice, asking pointed questions about their living situation, their lack of permanent address. David answered with the careful politeness of a child who'd learned too young how to navigate adult suspicions. Sarah paused in the doorway, watching the scene unfold. Patricia's eyes were closed, but her face held a peaceful expression as David's young voice brought Dickens' characters to life. The love between them was evident, a bond forged through hardship and mutual dependence. "She taught me to read with that book," David said softly, noticing Sarah's presence. "Every Christmas we'd read it together, even when we didn't have anywhere warm to stay." The words cut through Sarah like glass. While she'd been building her career, creating what she thought was a stable life, her son had been learning to read by streetlight, finding comfort in classic literature while searching for shelter. "You read beautifully," Sarah said, stepping closer. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Soon she would have to tell him the truth. Soon their careful dance of nurse and patient would shatter into something far more complex. Patricia's eyes fluttered open. "Sarah," she whispered, her voice still weak, but clearer than it had been. "Thank you for everything you've done for us." "You don't need to thank me," Sarah replied, the words carrying weight Patricia couldn't yet understand. "David he's a remarkable boy. He's my miracle. Patricia said, reaching for David's hand. "When Tom and I couldn't have children, when we'd given up hope, and then this perfect little soul came into our lives." Sarah's breath caught. The timing aligned perfectly. David would have been placed for adoption just when Patricia and her husband were seeking a child. The universe had conspired to place her son with people who would love him, even if circumstances had later turned cruel. "Mom, you should rest," David said, adjusting Patricia's blanket with the careful attention of someone who'd been caregiving far longer than his years should have required. As visiting hours ended, Sarah found herself walking David to the hospital's main entrance. The evening was crisp, Christmas lights twinkling from nearby buildings. In a few days, families would gather around trees, exchanging gifts and creating memories. Sarah wondered what Christmas morning would bring for her and David if she'd found the courage to reveal their connection by then. "Sarah?" David's voice was hesitant. "Can I ask you something?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. "Why do you care so much? About me and Mom, I mean. You've done more for us than—" He trailed off, searching for words. "It feels like more than just being our nurse." The question hung between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed. Sarah looked into his eyes, Michael's eyes, and saw the intelligence there, the intuition that had helped him survive on the streets. He sensed something, even if he couldn't name it yet. "Sometimes," she said carefully, "we meet people who change us, people who matter in ways we can't immediately explain." David nodded slowly, as if her non-answer was answer enough, for now. As she watched him walk back toward the shelter where he'd been staying, Sarah made a decision. Tomorrow, she would speak with Patricia privately. Tomorrow, she would begin the impossible conversation about DNA results and adoption records and the miraculous, heartbreaking truth that had brought them all together. Tonight, she would simply hold the knowledge close, marveling at the mysterious ways love finds its way home. The courthouse steps felt cold beneath Sarah's feet as she climbed them one final time, Michael's small hand tucked securely in hers. 3 months had passed since that Christmas night at the cross. 3 months of paperwork, home visits, psychological evaluations, and legal proceedings that had tested every ounce of her patience and faith. "Are you nervous?" she asked Michael, adjusting his new tie, the first he'd ever owned. "A little," he admitted, his voice stronger now, filled with the confidence that comes from knowing you belong somewhere. "But good nervous, like when you're about to open a present you've been waiting for." Sarah squeezed his hand. The boy who had once lived in the shadows of the hospital, surviving on stolen crackers and prayers, now stood beside her with his shoulders back and his eyes bright. The transformation hadn't been just physical, though the regular meals and warm bed had certainly helped. It was deeper than that. A healing of the soul that Sarah recognized because she'd experienced it herself. Inside the courtroom, familiar faces filled the gallery. Tom sat in the front row, his police uniform pressed and his smile wide. Dr. Martinez had taken the morning off from the hospital to be there, along with several nurses from the pediatric ward who had watched Michael's story unfold. Even Father Walsh had made the drive from the parish, his presence a quiet blessing on this momentous day. Judge Morrison, a stern woman with kind eyes, reviewed the final papers one last time before looking up at Sarah and Michael. "Mrs. Connor, you understand the full responsibility you're accepting today?" "Yes, Your Honor," Sarah replied, her hand resting protectively on her rounded belly. At 7 months pregnant, she'd faced countless questions about her ability to care for both children, but each challenge had only strengthened her resolve. "And Michael," the judge addressed him directly, "do you understand what adoption means? That Mrs. Connor will be your legal mother, with all the rights and responsibilities that entails?" Michael nodded solemnly. "It means I get to be part of a real family. It means my mom in heaven doesn't have to worry about me anymore because someone else loves me now too." The judge's stern expression softened. "That's exactly what it means." As the gavel fell, making the adoption official, Sarah felt a presence beside her as real as Michael's hand in hers. For just a moment, she could swear she smelled the faint scent of jasmine, The perfume Elena had worn during those final days in the hospital. A warmth spread through her chest, and she knew with absolute certainty that somewhere a mother's prayers had been answered. The celebration afterward was small but joyful. They gathered at Sarah's house, Michael's house now, for cake and ice cream. Tom regaled everyone with stories from his beat, carefully editing out the rougher details for Michael's sake. Dr. Martinez presented Michael with a stethoscope of his own, joking that he needed to start early if he wanted to follow in his adoptive mother's footsteps. Actually, Michael said quietly, accepting the gift with reverence, "I think I want to be a priest." The room fell silent for a moment, before Father Walsh let out a delighted laugh. "Well, in that case, we'd better start working on your Latin." As the afternoon wore on and the guests began to leave, Sarah found herself alone with Michael in the kitchen. He was carefully washing his new stethoscope in the sink, treating it like the precious gift it was. "Michael," she said softly, "I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me." He turned to face her, water dripping from his hands. "Okay. Are you happy, really, truly happy? Because if there's any part of you that's scared or unsure about this, we can—" "Mom," he interrupted, using the word that still made her heart skip. "Remember what you told me that first night, about how God puts people exactly where they need to be?" Sarah nodded, remembering the conversation in her car outside the hospital. "Well, I think maybe my first mom got sick so she could meet you, and maybe you had to lose your baby so you could find me, and maybe your new baby needed a big brother who would understand how precious life is." He dried his hands carefully before continuing. "It doesn't make the sad parts okay, but it makes them purposeful, I guess." Sarah felt tears spilling down her cheeks as she pulled him into a fierce hug. This child, who had endured more loss in his 10 years than many people face in a lifetime, had somehow found wisdom that eluded most adults. "I love you, Michael Connor," she whispered into his hair. "I love you too, Mom." Outside, the first snow of the new year began to fall, covering the world in a blanket of pristine white. Inside, a family born from loss and sealed with love settled into their first evening as something they'd never been before, officially, legally, and eternally whole. The hospital chapel had never felt so small. Sarah sat in the front pew, her hands trembling as she stared at the simple wooden cross hanging above the altar. The same cross where she'd first seen Danny kneeling in prayer just 3 weeks ago, though it felt like a lifetime had passed since that snowy Christmas Eve. Dr. Martinez's words echoed in her mind. The DNA results confirm it. "Danny is your biological nephew. Your sister Elena was his mother." Elena, the sister she'd lost to addiction 5 years ago, who had vanished from their lives without a trace. The sister Sarah had searched for desperately, hiring private investigators and posting on missing persons websites. The sister she'd mourned, assuming the worst while hoping for the best. Now she knew the truth. Elena had been here in the city all along, living on the streets, fighting her demons while trying to raise a son who had inherited nothing but her gentle heart and stubborn hope. "Sarah?" Danny's voice was soft as he slipped into the pew beside her. She'd asked him to meet her here, in this sacred space where their story had begun. His small hand found hers, and she marveled at how natural it felt, how right. "How are you feeling, sweetheart?" she asked, studying his face. Now that she knew, she could see it clearly. Elena's eyes, their father's stubborn chin, their mother's delicate features softened by youth and innocence. "Better," he said simply. "The medicine Dr. Martinez gave me is working, and Mrs. Patterson from Social Services says I can stay with you and Mr. Michael until everything gets sorted out legally." Sarah's heart swelled. Michael had been incredible through all of this, stepping up without hesitation to help her navigate the complex process of gaining custody. He'd even started converting his home office into a bedroom for Danny, painting the walls a soft blue that reminded her of hope. "Danny," she began carefully, "do you remember much about your mother? About Elena?" His face grew thoughtful. "She used to sing to me when I was little, Spanish lullabies. And she always told me that family was everything, that somewhere out there we had people who would love us if they could find us. Tears spilled down Sarah's cheeks. She was right. She was so right. "Why are you crying?" Danny asked, concerned. Sarah took a deep breath. This moment would change everything, and she wanted to handle it with the care it deserved. "Danny, do you remember your mother's last name, before things got hard for you both?" "Rodriguez," he said without hesitation. "Elena Rodriguez. She said it was important to remember where we came from." "My maiden name was Rodriguez too," Sarah said gently. "Elena was my sister. Your mother was my little sister, which makes you my nephew." Danny's eyes went wide, processing this revelation. "You're my family? Real family?" "Real family," Sarah confirmed, pulling him into her arms. "Elena and I lost touch years ago, but I never stopped looking for her. I never stopped loving her. And now I have you." They held each other in the quiet chapel, two broken pieces finding wholeness together. Sarah thought about the mysterious ways life worked, how her pregnancy had brought her to this very chapel on Christmas Eve, how her professional instincts had made her worry about a sick child, how love had made her refuse to let him go. "Is that why you helped me?" Danny asked. "Because you knew?" "No," Sarah said honestly. "I helped you because my heart told me to. I didn't know we were family until today, but maybe our hearts knew before our heads did." Michael appeared in the chapel doorway, his face gentle with understanding. He'd been giving them space to process this life-changing news, but his presence anchored Sarah in this new reality they were building together. "How are my two favorite people doing?" he asked, settling beside them in the pew. "We're family," Danny announced, his voice filled with wonder. "Sarah is my aunt, my real aunt." Michael smiled, ruffling Danny's hair. "That makes me the luckiest guy in the world, getting to be family with both of you." Sarah's hand moved instinctively to her belly, where her daughter continued to grow strong and healthy. This baby would have a cousin, a playmate, a brother in every way that mattered. The family she'd dreamed of was coming together in ways she never could have imagined. "Your mother loved you so much," Sarah whispered to Danny. "She would be so proud of the brave, kind boy you've become." "Do you think she's watching?" Danny asked, looking up at the cross. Sarah followed his gaze, feeling Elena's presence like a warm embrace. "I know she is, and I think she's finally at peace, knowing you're safe and loved." Outside the chapel windows, snow was beginning to fall again, just as it had on the night that brought them together. But this time, it felt like a blessing rather than a burden, covering the world in fresh possibility and new beginnings. The morning sun filtered through the hospital chapel windows, casting rainbow patterns across the wooden pews where Sarah sat holding a small, leather-bound journal. 3 months had passed since that miraculous Christmas Eve, and the pages before her were filled with Michael's careful handwriting, letters to his mother, dreams for his future, and sketches of the life they were building together. The chapel door creaked open, and Michael appeared in his school uniform, backpack slung over his shoulder. At 13, he'd grown taller, his shoulders broader, but his eyes still held that same gentle wisdom that had first captured Sarah's heart at the Christmas cross. "Mom said I'd find you here," he said, sliding into the pew beside her. The word "Mom" still sent warmth flooding through Sarah's chest, even after all these weeks of hearing it. "How was your first day back at Jefferson Middle School?" Sarah asked, closing the journal and giving him her full attention. Michael's face lit up. "Mrs. Henderson, my science teacher, she wants me to enter the district science fair. And get this, there's a kid in my class whose mom is a nurse too. His name is Danny, and he invited me over this weekend." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. Watching Michael bloom in his new environment, seeing him make friends and embrace opportunities was a daily miracle she never took for granted. "Your mother would be so proud," she whispered, placing her hand over the gentle swell of her belly where her daughter grew stronger each day. Michael's expression softened. "I talk to her every night. Tell her about school, about you and Dad, about my little sister." He placed his own hand over Sarah's. "I think she knows. Sometimes I dream about her holding the baby." The chapel filled with comfortable silence, broken only by the distant sounds of the hospital beyond the walls. This place had become their sanctuary, where they came to remember Maria's love and to feel grateful for the impossible way their lives had intertwined. "There's something I want to show you," Michael said, reaching into his backpack. He pulled out a manila folder and opened it carefully. Inside were architectural sketches, detailed, precise drawings of a building. "I've been working on this in art class," he explained, his voice gaining excitement. "It's a center for homeless families. See, there would be temporary housing here, but also medical care, job training, and a school for the kids. And right here," he pointed to the center of the complex, "a chapel, just like this one." Sarah studied the drawings, amazed by the thoughtfulness and detail. "Michael, these are incredible. You really designed all this yourself?" He nodded. "I keep thinking about all the families out there like Mom and me. What if there was a place where they could get help without being separated, where kids didn't have to choose between school and taking care of their parents?" "You want to be an architect," Sarah said, understanding flooding through her. "An architect who builds hope," Michael corrected. "Mr. Peterson, he's my math teacher. He says if I keep my grades up, I could get a scholarship to the state university. They have one of the best architecture programs in the country." Sarah pulled Michael into a tight hug, overwhelmed by his compassion and determination. "We'll make sure you get there, whatever it takes." The chapel door opened again, and David appeared, still wearing his scrubs from his shift in pediatrics. His face broke into a grin when he saw them. "My favorite people," he said, settling into the pew on Michael's other side. "How did the first day go, son?" As Michael recounted his day again, sharing his science fair invitation and architectural dreams, Sarah watched her husband's face. David had embraced fatherhood with the same gentleness he brought to his young patients. The three of them had found their rhythm as a family with surprising ease, bound together by love and loss and the miracle of second chances. "Speaking of school," David said when Michael finished, "I have some news. The hospital board approved the scholarship fund." Sarah gasped. They'd been working for months to establish a memorial scholarship in Maria's name, designed to help homeless children continue their education. "The Maria Santos Memorial Education Fund will provide full scholarships for 5 students each year," David continued. "And guess who they want to be the first recipient?" Michael's eyes widened. "Really? But I don't need—" "You'll be the example," Sarah interrupted gently. "You'll show other kids what's possible. That's what your mother would want, for you to light the way for others." As they sat together in the quiet chapel, Sarah felt the baby kick gently, as if responding to the love surrounding her. In 4 months, Maria Elena would join their family, carrying the name of the woman whose sacrifice had brought them all together. Outside, the late afternoon sun painted the sky in shades of gold and pink, and somewhere in the distance, the hospital Christmas cross stood ready for another season of miracles.